You gotta have empathy for where the opposite sex is. I mean, whether it's your partner, whether it's a sister, whether it's your parent, just being able to be aware of like what their journey is like. It's gonna allow you to have a little bit more empathy for them and understanding of just where they're at in the world. Welcome to the Better Than Rich Show with your hosts, Andrew Biggs and Mike Abramowitz. The Better Than Rich Show helps ambitious leaders who are on a mission to leave the world better than they found it, change their perspective on what's important, increase their income and impact, and systemize their life and business. If you've ever struggled with finding your purpose, have felt disconnected or distracted, or found yourself going through the motions, this show will remind you that what you do matters and will re-inspire you to chase your highest dreams. It's time for you to become better than rich.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Better Than Rich Show. I'm your host, Andrew Biggs, and I'm here with my co-host, Mike Abramowitz. Mike, how's it going?
I'm feeling good. I'm ready for the session 2 of the life cycle of a man and a woman sequence. So this is such a fun topic. We already got such great reviews and comments on the life cycle of a man. So now I'm very interested to see what's going to happen with the woman one, with two dudes trying to explain.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you're, today you have signed on to listen to two guys talk about the life cycle of a woman. So hopefully we will do it justice. This is not necessarily our work. It is kind of an amalgamation of some work that Alison Armstrong has put together, as well as I want to send some props out to Elizabeth Webb, who's an incredible coach. You can check her out, positivelyelizabeth.com. She's a friend of mine, and she kind of walked us through a lot of this stuff as well. And this is something that we've presented on, right, Mike? To be fair, this isn't our first go around. We did this in front of about 40 people in Orlando, if you recall. And, the women there, they loved it, right? They loved this content and helping them understand where they're at on their feminine journey, right? And as a starting point, I will share that if you haven't listened to the last episode, go back and listen to Life Cycle of a Man. Whether you're a man or you're a woman, listen to this. Make sure you listen to that, because for the men, you really need to know what those stages are so that you can actually adopt the responsibility and the mission that you're on. And women, you really need to know what stage your man is in, or the man that you're looking to attract is in. And you can start to, if you're going on dates or something, you can start to say, oh, that's a knight, or he's a prince, and here's what he's got going for him, and here's what he's missing. So many good lessons from that episode. Here's what I'll say about this one, though. The life cycle of a woman, and this probably won't surprise you, is a little bit more complicated, right, Mike? We were kind of laughing about this as we were going through it, but I mean, there's like twice as many stages. So, why do you think, though, Mike, it matters for either a woman or a man listening to make sure that they glean some insights from this episode?
You gotta have empathy for where the opposite sex is. I mean, whether it's your partner, whether it's a sister, whether it's your parent, just being able to be aware of like what their journey is like. It's gonna allow you to have a little bit more empathy for them and understanding of just where they're at in the world, and also knowing what wounds that they have experienced or encountered, during their journey. So not only could you have empathy where you could understand, but also maybe a little bit of compassion and willingness to meet them where they're at, I think is really important. So patience, love, it's a beautiful thing when you could show up that way for your family or for your significant other.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to start breaking it down, and I'm going to kind of start by walking y'all through that there are two kind of tracks. They ultimately will converge towards the end. And just like last time where we ended at the king, this time we are going to end at the queen. So the queen and the mother are the two later stages, and those are the same, but there's kind of two tracks to get there. And there's kind of a more masculine track, and then there's a more feminine track. Let's start with the more traditional feminine track, and then we'll go to the more masculine track, which especially with just, changing gender roles and, the messaging in society, whether it's good or bad or whatever, there are more women taking that masculine track, because a lot of times that's what's required of them in the workplace. And so you will find yourself oftentimes on that track if you're listening, but also maybe you're attracted to the feminine path. And one of the things that I prefaced this when we had our meeting in Orlando was there's a little bit more, let's say, permeable borders between these levels of development in the female track versus the male. And so basically what I'm going to share is there might be times where, just to throw out a couple, like you might be like a go-getter and you're like a professional and you're really, really focused, but then like later that night you pull out your princess, right? And she shows up. And then like the next morning you're a little girl, and then like that weekend you're a Temptress, okay? Which are all different stages that we're on, but there's a little bit more leeway and play that goes into that. I mean, Mike, is there anything you want to say on that before we actually walk through the actual stages? But what do you think?
Yeah, I'm glad you said it, because bouncing back and forth, even though the trajectories are like there's a like say a high or a low or a masculine feminine, right? The bouncing back and forth consistently happens. I was having a conversation with one of my clients around this. That's why that was one of the inspirations around this conversation. It's like I said, we were talking, like I said, there's like the girl, like the tomboy version of a girl, that wants to kind of compete with the boys, but then there's also the that little girl, or like the maiden, who wants to like play house and cook and stuff, and she's like, yeah, that's totally me. I said, yeah, and that's confusing as shit, because it's like you're doing both, kind of bouncing around between the two. It's like it's a little different, for a boy. It's like putting on the makeup and then going to play sports. It's just not a thing for the traditional life cycle of a man. But for a woman, just this bouncing back and forth. Why that's so important for us as men to know, and also for women to be aware of. That's why there's not going to be this place where it's like, oh, he's supposed to be like me. A woman is not supposed to be like a man. A man's not, we have these different life cycles and these different journeys. So we don't have to be like each other, but it's important for us to understand one another of why we act the way we act and why we do and operate the way we do. So Andrew, talk to me about this. I'd like to know when you do it. It's up to you how you want to do it, but I'd love to know the way I received it when you did it. It was like, tomboy and the tomboy and little girl, like what, those are like this.
How are they contrasting?
Sure. Yeah, how they contrast from like 0 to 12 years old, and like the 13 to 16-year-old version, the maiden and the girl power. Because that way, I think when I received it, when I learned it, showing how they fluctuate back and forth versus this life cycle and this life cycle, that would be really helpful.
No, that's great.
To do that.
Yeah, that's great. So at the earliest stage, and again, you know this if you listen to the last episode, but we have the boy. Here we have the little girl, right? That's on the feminine side, and then on the more masculine side for the female journey is the tomboy. And so let's start with the little girl. The little girl is kind of like the little sweetheart, right? And she's probably modeling herself a little bit more off of mom than dad, right? And she's fulfilling a little bit more. She's taking more interest in the more feminine things, right? She wants to play with dolls, and she wants to brush her hair, and she wants to paint your fingernails, and she wants to have a tea party, right? And this is like the typical female thing. Like she's watching, or little girl thing. She's watching, the movies, and she's identifying with Snow White and Cinderella, right? And so she's a little bit more in that vein of this little girl who just wants to be a sweetheart, wants to be a little princess, and that's beautiful, right? And that's a little bit contrasted though with the tomboy, and she's taking a little bit more of a masculine track. And by the way, I think it just needs to be said when we're talking about gender and just how much of a hot topic that is, how hot button issue that is. There are masculine women and there are feminine dudes. Okay? That's okay. It's okay to be a masculine woman and it's okay to be a feminine dude. In 99.9% of the time, that doesn't mean you're the opposite gender. Okay? I just want to say that. That's what the statistics show. Watchful waiting, okay, when someone's questioning their gender is the right approach, right? Especially with young people. So if you're in a position to, influence that, I realize some people are going to disagree, and we're going to spark a controversy in the comments. How dare these guys tell me what to think? I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just telling you and reflecting what the data suggests. So the tomboy, though, is of taking a little bit more of a masculine approach. And maybe she's modeling herself off of dad a little bit more, right? She's wanting to do sports. She's taking an interest in, what are the guys doing? And hey, I want to those guys are racing. I'm gonna go race them too, right? Dad's going fishing. I want to go fishing with him, right? Anything a guy can do, I can do as well, right? And so this is what the tomboy is, and that kind of moves once like puberty hits. We start to move into the maiden and the girl power. So the maiden is in the feminine track, the girl power is in the masculine track. And the maiden is kind of like playing house, right? She's babysitting for the local kids in the neighborhood. She's babysitting her little sister and her little brother. She's helping around the house with mom and learning kind of how mom operates, right? She's taking an interest in those things, and she enjoys being a caretaker to others, even at a young age. She's already starting to do those things. Whereas the girl power is kind of like anything a guy can do, I can do better, right? It's a very like, where are the boys at? I want to compete with them. I'm going to play football. In fact, right? Who says I can't? And again, that's a beautiful energy to be putting out there to say, I'm going to be somebody who can't be ignored, who doesn't have to be a second, I don't need to be slower than the guy. I'm going to go try to beat him, right? And so this is kind of the energy of the girl power and the journey that they're on. And I want to actually pause there for a second, Mike, and kick it to you, and then we can talk about this next stage, because it is a pretty big shift from this kind of like younger energies, right? Kind of like early development, and then kind of like, teen to 16, kind of like early awkward years, sort of a phase. Because we're going to get into other phases here in a second. But what are your thoughts on this like early development for women?
Well, in that early development, they're starting to lay foundations where which one is going to be maybe a little bit more prominent, maybe not. That is like kind of foundational. For example, if they're like the maiden is kind of like laying this foundation for popularity, not fitting in, but being like that caretaker, like you said. It's like, I want to be around my friends and I want to be popular. And if you notice, like, that's kind of that maiden, where the girl power is like, I really don't give a shit. I don't care, if I have a lot of friends or I don't. I'm going to get results. I'm going to kick some ass. I'm going to take some names. And, maybe they happen to be popular, but like, that's not like a big motive. I wouldn't say that like they're motivated by being an outcast, but they're also not motivated to fit in. And I think that maiden might be a little bit more motivated to fit in, maybe avoid some of that conflict, where the girl power is like, yeah, conflict, bring it on. Like, I don't care. So I think because of that, this young female might want both. And if
For
they want to
sure.
bounce back and forth between like, I want the results and I also want to fit in. And this is where the complexities of social media come into play, because social media then says, wait a minute, I have a video of you being a tomboy, or a video of you being this girl power results. You're supposed to fit into this box. You can't be a popular girl and be in the kitchen cooking and doing all this feminine shit. You have to fit in this box as a masculine girl, because that's what we saw you do, and this is what has 1 million views, and that's what everyone knows you as. And now this teenage girl doesn't have the emotional intelligence or the capacity to say to themselves, well, I want to do both. So instead, they kind of conform into what the social media or society is telling them to do. And most of the time, parents and teachers aren't really equipped on this conversation topic either. So it creates confusion. And that's where it's so important for you as a listener to just be aware of like where, not only for you, but also where some of these little girls are on this developmental journey. So you can, again, meet them where they're at and help them see like, that's totally normal. Like, that's okay. Like,
Yes.
you don't have to fit into society's box,
I mean, especially early on, like everyone's trying to find out their identity. And I think for women, it's even harder, right? I would say in some ways, like, for men, it's a little easier in this department. There's a little bit less judgment and a little bit less criticism. And, oftentimes how men settle things is through physical altercations, right? Or at least the threat of physical altercations. You mentioned on the last episode, that you've been in a few fist fights yourself, right? And that was part of growing up, right? With women, that's typically not the case. Typically, how they engage in competition is reputation destruction. So it's like, how can I soil someone's reputation, or how can I spread a rumor? And these are very, very common things that, girls of this age will speak to and say, or women listening to this can go back, oh my gosh, like, yeah, the rumors and the way people treated me in middle school was the worst, right, or whatever. And this is very much so. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you have a daughter in this age range or something like that, encourage her to just explore both, right? Or whatever is she's leaning into, just encourage that. And encourage her to not need to be one thing, and not to see herself as one thing, that she can be multiple things, that we can be, all of us can be multiple things, right? At different times in our lives. So the next stage is really like moving into start kind of like the equivalent of the night on the men's side for the females. And this is for, right around that, 18 or maybe a little bit younger, but basically it's like the Temptress and the go-getter. So the go-getter is on the masculine side, the Temptress is more on the feminine side. And the Temptress is basically, she's starting to recognize that she can actually affect how things operate based on just showing up, right? So the Temptress she's starting to explore her sexuality. She's starting to understand that maybe men are even paying attention to her, right? Or that if I act a certain way, I can gain attention from men or from women, right? Who maybe want to be like me if I kind of play up my sensuality. And so this is the Temptress, and I think it's an important stage, right? It's an important stage for a woman to embody her sexiness, right? And love her body and love who she is and love, that, like, to feel sexy and to be willing to be sexy as comfortable as she is, right? And that's going to mean different things to different women, of course. Of course, this can be taken too far, right? And maybe it becomes almost like the only value that this woman has. And then she, only finds her fulfillment through the attention of men, right? You probably know some women like that. Typically, they aren't super happy, right? Because, unfortunately for all of us, our youth and beauty will fade. Okay, so I hate to break that to you, but 100% of us are going to die. 100% of us, our youth and our beauty, will escape us. Some quicker than others, fair enough. Some people are more beautiful than others, fair enough. But no matter what, you're gonna get old. You're gonna lose your youth and beauty. And if you define yourself by that, how happy are you going to be when you're in your 40s and 50s and 60s, right? And then the opposite of, not the opposite, but the other side of this is the go-getter. And this is like the overachiever, right? The overachiever type who's like, she's valedictorian, right? She had a 4.0. She got a full ride to Stanford. She's, pre-med. She's constantly focused. She's like pre-med and pre-law, right? And like just constantly focused on like achievement. And it's almost like a knight in the male track, but in the female package. And so, but she is constantly focused on proving herself, on accomplishing things, on, she's like, I'm captain of the soccer team, and I got a 4.0, and, I already have, 30 college credits heading into my freshman year of college because I took my AP classes or whatever. And so this sort of go-getter energy is preparing her for the workforce. And that's kind of, sometimes these women negate the Temptress entirely, or sometimes it's a little underdeveloped because they're just focused on other things. But Mike, what are your thoughts on the Temptress and the go-getter?
So the Temptress I had written down in my notes is like the flirt is what I had written down.
Sure.
So I love what you said about that. As a Temptress is learning about herself, she might flirt a little bit. She's just uncovering, like realizing that it's like, wow, I could get people's attention. And I also like that you said that other people are watching, like maybe the maidens are watching this Temptress, and she likes being like this little, like a role model for these other maidens and whatnot. So I think that's really beautiful. And then you have this maiden who also says, I also want to be a track star, and or I want to rock at swimming, or I'm going to rock at softball. So it's like being able to bounce between those is perfect. It's amazing. It's exactly normal. And coming back to what I said before, society says no. You play a sport, so therefore you also can't be this flirtatious, sexy version of you. In some cases it's also like honored and embraced. And I think that's really important for
Hmm.
you, listener, again, to just reflect back on not just on you, but also reflect back on, people in your life that are in these stages. The challenge, again, coming back to this social media, is they want to put you in a box. Don't let them. Don't be put in this box. Don't let
Hmm.
society, don't let your peer group put you in a box. And that's why it's important for you to be aware of it. I would also say if you're older, and you're no longer the temptress or no longer the go-getter, but you still finding yourself wanting that attention, based upon achievement or based upon results or based upon your sexiness or based upon, attraction. I think it's important for you as a mature listener to say, what Andrew's question that he poses is this bringing me the fulfillment that I want in my life? Is this really what I want to be known for? Do I want to be known for just the person who gets results, or do I want to be known for just the person who is attractive and looks beautiful? Um, the answer to the question might not be yes. It might be something more than that. And that's why, as we enter into like princess and professional and mother and queen, it's important for you to think about what are the character traits of these individuals? What are their values that they embody, more so than just looks or results? So, Andrew.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's these are just some really really great points. And to be quite frank, I think like more so than the men in our journey, women again, you could be a queen today and then like call in your temptress like later this evening, right? Like, and it's like just making sure you kind of get a mix, and it's like jumping back and forth and here and there is normal for you. You're comfortable with that, right? Even as somebody who's been further along. So it's like, yeah, I hope that my wife never loses her temptress energy, right? Like, let's hope not, right? Because that's, that'd be sad, and it would be missing that sexual spark that hopefully would, continue long into our later years, right? And so it's like, men don't want a woman who's only one thing, right? And women, you listening, you don't want to just be one thing. So I think this is just some really good points. By the way, the other thing I would just encourage you, if you're listening, you're like, oh yeah, maybe you're reflecting back on your childhood. Think about what path you took and what developmental journey you took, and what sort of stories that you picked up along the way. Maybe you picked up one of those stories like you can't be both, right? And just think about that, right? If you're a woman listening to this, saying, yeah, did I kind of ignore my temptress because I was so focused on getting great grades and proving my worth to the guys? Or hey, did I kind of miss out on some of my like achievement energy because I was just focused on my popularity and flirting or whatever? And so look at your stories that you picked up along the way and how they're affecting you today. The next two stages on the feminine side is the princess, and on the masculine side it's the professional. And the princess is somebody who's basically kind of maybe she works a little bit, but mostly she's focused on domestic life, right? So she's interested in kind of being a princess and being taken care of, and being somebody who also takes care of her what's in her purview, but ultimately isn't as interested in these outward achievements, is more focused internally on herself, on her serving her husband, on serving her family, right? And so it's really about this sort of like, the again, a little bit more of a traditional gender role position, where it's like, okay, I'm just focused on being a great homemaker and focused on things domestically, and being taken care of, right? And it's an interesting kind of debate, right, Mike? It's like, is it okay for women to want to be taken care of? It's just a question that popped up in my head, and I think I have my answer, but I want to hear yours. Like, what are your thoughts on like this desire that I think sometimes it's almost like, why do you need a man? Like a woman needs a man, like a fish needs a bicycle or whatever. And it's like, well, I'm just, maybe it would be nice to be taken care of every once in a while. But like, I don't know what comes up for you, Mike.
Not a great response, but it depends. It depends.
There you go.
And the reason why I think it depends is do you have an aspiration of having kids? Because if there's kids in the mix, then I think it changes a little bit of the dynamic. But I think if it's
Mm,
just someone who wants to be taken care of and they're in their early stages and they're not ready to have kids, or maybe kids wasn't in the path for them, and um, I think the speaking openly, I think it could potentially create challenge in the relationship, in the sense that a true man is one to have is going to want to have at some point, not a worthy opponent. It's not, it doesn't sound good, but like they do want to be challenged in the relationship, and if they are
mm,
only coming home to someone that they are just taking care of consistently, I think it could potentially create some level of disconnect,
mm.
possibly.
Sure, sure. And I think it's a good answer. And I think my thoughts are, it's okay to want to be taken care of, ladies. Like, it's okay. Like, part of our
The
role as
long-term
men.
consequence, sorry, I should
No,
say
yeah,
that.
totally. And
You're right,
I
you're
wanna
right.
I'm gonna speak to that too. But it's like, part of our role is to be like a protector and a provider, right? And we enjoy that. And again, what hypergamy would suggest is that women marry up and across socioeconomically, right? And men marry across and down. And that's not just a Western civilization thing. You can find that all across the globe. And so typically women find men who make more money than them more attractive than guys who make less than them. That's probably not that surprising. Maybe it's politically incorrect to say, but if you look at the marriage statistics, that's what everything suggests. So I would say it's okay to want to be taken care of from time to time, and also it's gonna get old, right? If you're this, not just a princess, but a spoiled princess, like you are a princess who just has who's entitled, right? And I think basically what I think Mike's getting at is like, there's a difference between a stay-at-home wife and a stay-at-home mom, right? It's like, I'm not super interested in having a stay-at-home wife because it's like, what are you doing all day, right? Stay-at-home mom though, like she's working more than me. Let's be honest, So it's like, and the types of work I tried taking care of our newborn infant and let her work for a week one time, and I was completely broken. I was like in tears, and she's like, I do this all day every day. I'm like, I know, I can't do it. So it's like, it's a completely different skill set, and it should be honored and valued. And so it's like, what does the partnership look like is kind of what I hear you asking, Mike. And I think it's okay, excuse me, if it's not linear, but there does need to be like some contribution coming from both sides, right?
And men, a lot of men, I mean, we like to be the hero, we want to be the
Sure.
hero, we want to be needed,
Hmm.
right? I think that's important. I actually had one of my clients ask me, like, what's the difference between being needy and needed? And I asked the tribe this. I asked a couple of people in my life, like, what is your explanation? What's the difference? And like, how does a woman know? Like, shit, I want to make sure that my man needs me, but I don't want to feel like I'm needy. And I think it was an
Hmm.
interesting topic. I think you had a great response to that. I didn't. That's why I asked everyone. So
Yeah, we were walking through it in our group chat, and we were talking just about the idea of um, just doing your best to not compete with your partner, right, is a really important thing. And so if everyone's kind of keeping track, right, of like, well, I made this much money, and then it's like, well, I changed this many diapers, and I did this many dishes, and I took the trash out this many times, and just like, if we're constantly comparing and keeping track, it can turn really resentful really fast, right? Whereas if you can just be honestly appreciative of your man when he brings home the bacon or when he takes the trash out or whatever he does, that's going to go a long way, and hopefully he'll reciprocate as well. So, so that's kind of like the princess, right? And again, it's cool to be a princess. It's cool to be taken care of, and also find a way to contribute as well, so you don't become the entitled, spoiled princess. And then the professional is someone who's really not focused on domestic life. This is kind of like, I kind of think like 20 to 30, 20 to 35, maybe these days, is like the professional and the princess stages. But like this person is just a little bit more focused on her career, right? She's focused on how do I advance? How do I position myself? Very much into corporate cut, right? To say, I'm going to be taken seriously in the corporate world. I'm going to be delivering on a daily basis. I have so many skills. A lot of them, a lot of times, I'm better than most of the men in the room or all the men in the room, and I'm going to show it. And why not, right? When you're smart, when you're talented, when you're educated, when you're trained, when you have all these skills, why wouldn't you want to do that? And the professional is a really great opportunity for a woman to define herself, not just through her relationships. I think sometimes the princess can kind of fall into everything is defined by a relationship and maybe doesn't have as many hobbies or interests or outside things, whereas the professional has a life that's independent of her relationships. Now, one of the downsides of the professional is I see this a lot where someone, is making 200, 300, 500 grand a year, but they're working like 60 to 80 hours a week. They're like, not really taking care of their health. They're just pounding coffee. They don't get enough sleep. She's doing a great job. She's invaluable at the company. Her company never wants to see her go. And yet she's like, oh, man, like, what's it all for? I don't have the man in my life that I want to have. I don't have children yet. And they start to question that. And so that is a unique challenge that you want to watch out for, because I imagine a lot of the women listening can find themselves right now in this professional role or in this sort of stage. Mike, any thoughts on this before we move to the mother?
Yeah, the big thought is they have a time clock. So
Sure.
that's the one thing that a woman has that the man doesn't. So we that's just what it is. Science is science. So
Mm-hmm.
the challenge there is for the professional is if they spend so much time on getting the results, building their business, climbing up the ranks, and now they're in their mid 30s. Well, if that female didn't spend the time on loving herself, entering into that feminine core, attracting the opposite sex or attracting a family into her life or whatnot, well, that body clock is ticking. And if you ask someone who is maybe a little bit older, like the old maid, or a goddess, either one, but if you, or a mother, or you talk to one of these people, they might even tell you, hey, if you're on this professional track, you might want to get your eggs frozen when you're in your 20s and just keep going on this professional track. And just store them and freeze them, so that way you have like 25, 27-year-old eggs that are frozen, so when you do find that time where you want to be that mother, at least you have this like insurance policy and the clock isn't against you. And I don't think that's talked about enough in our society. And it kind of goes on the other end with the man too. And obviously it's a whole nother topic, but we just believe that this cycle, it's just very like, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. I make my money and then I get into a relationship and then I have my kids and then we start this new journey together. And it's just like fairy tale sometimes, so
Yeah.
we do want to kind of be cautious a little bit on the professional side, due to the body clock would be my
Yeah.
thought there.
And again, a lot of times when we think about what really matters, it's like, family matters, right? And relationships matter and love matters. And like, if you if you quit your job, today, if you're a professional who's fitting that mold that Mike just described, your company might miss you, right? Because you're extremely productive and extremely valuable, but they would find a replacement. Nobody can have your children for you, right? So it's like, and no one can be their mom, so other than you. So that is part of your destiny, should you want that for yourself. And again, here's what I'd say, most of the time, that's the right move. If you're not going to have children, fair enough. You definitely need to find another outlet to mother, or you're going to be pretty unhappy and turn into an old maid later in life. And it's interesting what you said about the eggs and stuff. I mean, obviously you know that better than most because you've gone through these treatments and different things like that. But so yeah, something to consider. Unfortunately, there's an old saying where the old man goes to the young man and says, my one piece of advice is to remember that it all moves so fast. and the tragedy is that the young man will never believe him. But that's an old saying. So women, maybe actually consider what Mike is bringing forth in the wisdom. Even if you're young and you think, oh, I'm going to meet Prince Charming next year.
And the reason why I bring it up is because we're doing IVF and it's male factor, but my wife and I are in a lot of IVF groups, so the IVF in vitro process. So there's a lot of
Sure.
these women who have miscarriages and failed
Mm.
pregnancies nonstop over and over and over again. And it's like sometimes it's due to male factor, and it's in fact 1 out of 4 times it's due to male factor. But like not many people think that's going to happen to them. But we're in these communities of tens of thousands of people that we encounter their story, and we never could think it's going to be us. But then when it is, it's like shoot, like
Mm.
what are we going to
Mm.
do about it? And I just think it's important for us, in this community at Better Than Rich to offer that wisdom. So if you're like in that late 20s, early 30s type of phase, and you're like, I don't know if I want to have kids, maybe it potentially could be a good insurance policy to say, let me really, get counsel and, really strategize through this, because ultimately there is a little bit of a clock kind of ticking a little bit
Mm.
for many women. And I
Mm.
know one of my sisters, unfortunately, I mean, she just got to that place in life where it was just too late. She tried, and now she's in her 50s, and that's one, if you ask her, it's one of her biggest regrets is that she
Mm.
wasn't able to have kids because she was so focused on her career. I mean, she was a private school teacher, went to NYU, she racked up a lot of student loan debt, worked a lot, dedicated a lot of her time and energy to like really learn and become a great teacher, which is awesome. But now it's like, shoot, I really wish that maybe I don't want to say there's regret, but there is a
Mm.
little bit of
Sure.
like, you know,
Yeah.
heaviness there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of nicely transitions us into this next, kind of stage, and that is the mother stage. And this is where these two lines will converge. So mother and then queen are both the same for all women. But the mother stage is, you start to obviously maybe you actually are become a mother, right? And so you're mothering children, and you're obviously taking care of them. And if you're not, you're starting to get that motherly impulse, right? Maybe around 30 or so, late 20s, early 30s. And, even if you aren't a mother, maybe you're mothering your friends, right? You're giving them sort of motherly advice. Maybe you're mothering, the people in your office or something. And it's like, hey guys, just so you know, I cooked for everybody. And, Friday's lunch, I went ahead and took care of everything. And Steve, you're looking a little sick. Do you need any medicine? I have some cough syrup here. Or like, you're just starting to mother things because you can't help it, right? And so maybe you're in that stage, and you can relate to this. But no matter what, you're going to start to have this sort of like maternal instinct kick in, whether it's for your children, and that's some, who you're going to mother, or it's those around you. Maybe you're even mothering a cause. Maybe you're mothering an idea, a project, something that matters. Though you're not mothering just your career, you're mothering something else, right? Besides yourself. Whereas mostly, and this is not different than the men, but it's like generally before 30, we're really kind of just focused on ourselves, who we are, our path to success, and our journey. And this is where it starts to shift, though, towards looking at others. So that's the mother. And then finally there's the queen. And this is where not only have you've mothered for a while, oftentimes you've mothered for 10, 20, 30 years, but when you're the queen, you start to see being the mother of all, right? Where, you're mothering not just your family, right? Because oftentimes, like, you got to be kind of like protective and like throw a few elbows, to be a mom and like protect your kids. Like whether that's like from bullying on the playground, or it's like the teacher who got the grade wrong or whatever. It's just like, you're a little bit like protective, and like you're at the playground, you're like scanning around to see like, is there any threats on the horizon? Because like that's part of being a mother, when you're protecting that. When your kids get a little older, maybe you're an empty nester, you start to turn that towards, well, what if I was a mother to my community? What if I was a mother to my church? What if I was a mother to this cause in the world, and you start to mother the entire world, the entire planet, and hopefully you're stewarding it in a direction that's really meaningful. So those are my thoughts about the mother and the queen. We can also hit on the old maid here as well. But Mike, what are your thoughts
the
here?
old maid and the goddess, because that's like the female version of the Lord, the one who's
Yeah,
like, you know what, king is great, but I'm kind of content over here.
yeah,
I don't really need a mother communities and people and shit like that.
yeah,
The goddess is like, I'll just mother myself, and then the old maid is like, forget this feminine stuff. I'm not all about that. And then they're all
yeah.
kind of old and bitter. But what's your what's your explanation
Yeah,
of
I think like the
her?
old maid is kind of like this bitter, resentful woman who really just, maybe things didn't go her way. Maybe she's in a marriage that she's really unhappy in. Maybe she couldn't have kids. Maybe she tried playing around with the Temptress and got burned and maybe even was sexually abused or something. And so she shut down her sexuality and hid her body and hid who she was and tried to really just create this protective shell around herself. And so, that's kind of the old maid. And, we could probably think about some women that you know personally who might fit that category. And it's not a super endearing place to be, right? And, sometimes it's not even their fault necessarily because maybe they were a victim, but what does it look like to regain your power? And what does it look like to get rid of your resentment? What does it look like to forgive yourself for something you did? Like, these are questions that I would ask if you're like, oh, I don't want to put myself in the old maid category, but part of me is like, if I were to be honest, I am a little bitter. I am a little resentful. I am a little cynical. I don't like men, I think all men are shit, and, my kids don't talk to me, and or whatever. So it's like, when you start to get to that place, what are you going to do to climb out? Like, how are you going to get back on track? And I think getting counsel is really important, whether it's through a community like ours and coaching like ours, or hire a therapist. I don't care how you do it, but you need to unwind and unravel some of these things you've been hiding and some of these things you've been keeping locked down. And then the goddess, I actually have like a more positive connotation of the goddess. And the goddess is kind of like this connection to your intuition. And the way Elizabeth described it to me was like, just the obvious, and I don't think this comes as a surprise, but I do think women typically, okay, again, these are talking broad strokes. It's not like this is all women versus all men or anything like that. But typically, they tend to be more connected to intuition than men are. They tend to be more connected to nature, connected to the earth a little bit more. Than men are. And so the goddess can kind of is an energy you can call on when you need to where it's like, I need some like Mother Earth wisdom here. How can, like, what do I need to do? And like reconnect to that grounded, purposeful intuition that you have as a woman. And if you haven't been connected to that as much lately, it might feel a little out of practice, but you need to work on that and make sure you're developing that intuition. And then, it's like, hey, what do I need right now? Do I need to be a temptress? Do I need to be a princess, a go-getter, a professional, a queen, a mother, what have you? But that's my interpretation of the goddess. So, Mike, we got a couple minutes left before we got to head for the exits, but closing thoughts.
Yeah, on that, the goddess, in my layman's terms that I have in my notes, is the goddess feels safe with herself and who she is, and the old maid just unfortunately did not feel safe and with who she is and what she was becoming. So safety is very important when it comes to the life cycle of a woman. So doing what you can to surround yourself around things that make you feel safe, people that make you feel safe, I think is really important.
It's a great important reminder. And a lot of women driving their cars right now are nodding along and saying hell yes to that. Well, I honestly, I think this is a super thought-provoking and in some ways sort of, something that could spark conversation. So if you need anything with this, if you have any questions with this, if you think we're completely full of shit, I don't care. Let us know in the comments or let us know, slide into our DMs, let us know. We'd love to serve you or just have a conversation in general, right, on any of these topics that are somewhat charged, right? If we're going to be honest, it's somewhat of a charged topic, but a lot of times topics that matter are charged. So That's all we have for today. I hope you've enjoyed this 2-part series on the life cycle of a man and the life cycle of a woman. Until next week, remember to leave today better than you found it. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the show, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest from us, you can follow us on Instagram at betterthan_rich and join our Facebook group at the Better Than Rich Show. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to seeing you next time. And remember, leave today better than you found it.